Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, November 1st, 2024. All right, first thing, another reminder, we're still doing our fundraiser. We're trying to finish up by Tuesday, by Election Day. I'm not sure if that's going to happen yet, but we're getting close to the end, to our goal of $100,000. And antiwar.com is entirely reader funded. We have to do these fundraisers at least 3 or 4 times a year, depending on how they go. So please, if you could help us out, go to antiwar.com/donate. The money goes directly to supporting the site, keeping the site running, paying the staff, things like that. And you could also write it off on your taxes because we are a nonprofit. So antiwar.com/donate. You could pay through PayPal, credit card, Bitcoin, any sort of crypto really we can accept. So antiwar.com/donate. All right, the first story here. Israel prevents North Gaza residents from return. So the Israeli military is preventing residents of Jabalia in northern Gaza from returning to their homes as part of an ethnic cleansing campaign. And this was reported by Haaretz on Wednesday. The report said the military is blocking the return of approximately 50,000 residents due to pressure from Israeli political leadership. It said the Israeli army acknowledged it's carrying out a partial implementation of the general's plan, which calls for a complete ethnic cleansing of all areas of Gaza north of the Netzrim corridor. That's a strip of land controlled by the Israeli military. Maybe I've been a little redundant with these stories about this, but I just think that it's really important for people to understand that you have the U.S. denying that Israel is doing this, but it's very clear if you read Israeli media, if you just see what's happening on the ground, that this is underway. And you see this picture here. These are displaced residents from the area, and it's women and children. This is who is being displaced and being killed and starved. So as part of this ethnic cleansing campaign, Israel has cut off virtually all aid deliveries into northern Gaza since the beginning of October. The Haaretz report said senior Israeli military and Shin Bet officials acknowledged that the general's plan violates international law, but they are claiming the partial implementation of the plan does not, even though it has involved a starvation blockade and large-scale attacks on civilians. The report said that the residents of Jabalia or Jabalia, I've been saying Jabalia, I think the proper pronunciation is Jabalia. I've heard people kind of say both. But the report said that the residents, quote, will only be allowed to return after Israeli security control over the area is complete, including designating parts of it demilitarized buffer zones, end quote. And Israel already has a big buffer zone around the whole border of Gaza, the whole Israel border Gaza that cuts in about 1 kilometer where they've destroyed everything. So the report is saying, they'll be able to return eventually after this certain point. But this general's plan, there's no part of the plan is about returning residents. And Israeli soldiers have been destroying buildings in Jabalia, in these areas that they're pushing them out. They push them out. They blow up buildings. They knock them over with bulldozers. They torch the place. So they're not going to have anywhere to go back to. And this Palestinian journalist, Yunus Tir-Awi, he follows kind of the social media activity of Israeli soldiers. And him and another journalist had that big report in Drop Site News recently, basically following a battalion that has just been destroying buildings in Gaza. And so this is a post from an Israeli soldier in a company that's currently operating in Jabalia. And he shared a post showing himself leveling a residential building in the refugee camp. So you see a bulldozer here just knocking over this building, just completely destroying it. And the caption that he wrote in this post said, quote, making sure they have nowhere to return to, end quote. So, of course, this general's plan could pave the way to Jewish settlements, which is supported by Netanyahu's Likud party and many ministers in the Israeli government. This is the direction that things are heading, the way that things are heading. And with the election coming up, I mean, it just seems like nobody's really paying attention to this, just really getting buried in the news. All right, the next one here. Israeli forces kill 41 more Palestinians in Gaza over 24 hours. So Gaza's health ministry said Thursday that Israeli forces killed at least 41 Palestinians and wounded 131 in the previous 24-hour period. The ministry's numbers only include dead and wounded who have been brought to hospitals and morgues. Medical sources speaking to Al Jazeera, they put the number a little higher. They said that at least 45 were killed by Israeli attacks on Thursday. Strikes were reported in central Gaza's Nusayrat refugee camp and in Gaza City in the north. An Al Jazeera reporter said Israeli troops began a ground incursion into Beit Lahia, a northern city that's been under total siege since the beginning of October. And as I mentioned yesterday, it declared it was a disaster zone due to the lack of food, water, hospitals, doctors, and any kind of services. And you see this picture here. This is at the Ali Baptist Hospital in Gaza City. A boy mourning family members who were killed. Gaza's health ministry said that the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia had again come under Israeli attack. The ministry wrote on Telegram, quote, Israeli occupation forces bombed the desalination plant for the kidney dialysis department, the engineering and maintenance department, and water tanks inside Kamal Adwan Hospital. Israeli occupation aircraft bombed the third floor of Kamal Adwan Hospital, and due to the bombing, the medicine warehouse burned down. Medical supplies that were received 5 days ago from the World Health Organization, end quote. So I didn't realize a few days ago a delegation or some workers from the World Health Organization made it to Kamal Adwan and brought medical supplies, but apparently they've already been destroyed by the Israeli military strikes. Hospital workers were injured as a result of the renewed Israeli attacks. The hospital had barely any staff as it was before the latest attack after Israeli troops arrested dozens of medical workers. Eid Sabah, the director of nursing at Kamal Adwan, told Al Jazeera, quote, the hospital has no medical teams, doctors, surgeons, orthopedics. More than 33 people between doctors and nurses have also been arrested, end quote. So just an absolutely horrific situation that's being funded and totally enabled by the U.S. government. The next one here, Bill Clinton criticized for saying Israel is forced to kill Gaza civilians. So this article's from Al Jazeera. So I saw this clip going around of Bill Clinton justifying the killing of civilians in Gaza by Israel. And when I first saw it, I didn't realize he was in Michigan, which Michigan has the highest, Arab and Muslim population in the country. It's a big swing state. Harris's support for this genocidal war that's been going on could really cost her in Michigan. So they send Bill Clinton over there, and this is what he has to say. So former U.S. President Bill Clinton is facing backlash from U.S. Muslim and Arab Americans after saying Israel has been forced to kill civilians in Gaza and suggesting the country was in the Holy Land first before the Palestinians. So speaking at a rally for Kamala Harris in Michigan, a crucial U.S. swing state with large Arab and Muslim populations, Clinton said he understood people's concerns about the bloodshed in Gaza, but said Israel had no choice but to inflict large civilian losses, even as it is accused of genocide in the International Court of Justice. Clinton said, quote, Hamas makes sure that they're shielded. They'll force you to kill civilians if you want to defend yourself, end quote. They'll just force you to kill all those women and children that you see being killed every day, is essentially what he's saying here. And he also stirred controversy when he said that Israelis were in the Holy Land first. He said, quote, I got news for Hamas. Israelis were there first before their faith existed, end quote. He avoided any reference to the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians ethnically cleansed from their homes in 1948 during the war that established Israel that Palestinians know as the Nakba. So Arab and Muslim American leaders slammed Clinton for antagonizing communities whose votes Democrats have been courting in the razor-tight November 5th U.S. election. Abdullah Hamid, the mayor of the U.S.'s first Arab-majority city, Dearborn, said remarks by Clinton and other Democratic leaders were not helping the party's case with his community. And he also mentioned the fact that Harris is campaigning with Liz Cheney. I'll just read his quote because it's interesting. Quote, "When you see the remarks of former President Bill Clinton talking about how Israel is forced to kill civilians, it gets extremely frustrating. When you have surrogates like Liz Cheney campaigning across the state of Michigan, talking about how even Dick Cheney, the war criminal, is supporting Vice President Harris, is that supposed to be a welcoming message to this community?" End quote. All right, so the next one here, a report says that Iran is preparing to attack Israel from Iraq. So Israeli sources told Axios on Thursday that Israeli intelligence suggests Iran is preparing to launch a reprisal attack on Israel from Iraqi territory in the coming days, and that it could even happen before the November 5th U.S. presidential election. The Israeli sources said the Iranian attack could involve a large number of drones being fired from Iraq. They said launching it from Iraq through Iranian allied Shia militias could be an attempt to avoid another round of Israeli airstrikes on Iranian territory. If another escalation starts from Iraq, there's a big risk there to U.S. troops who are in Iraq and also in Syria. They could come under attack. I mean, if it's actually the militias doing it, you know, they've attacked the U.S. quite a bit. So that's the question here. They're saying Iran is preparing an attack, but they might do it through the militias. So not clear if it would actually be the Iranian military firing the drones and missiles. I mean, if it's really Iran's, you know, ballistic missiles, it would probably be the Iranian military. So, you know, there's the risk here of the U.S. getting targeted, not just in Iraq and Syria, but there's also those about 100 or so U.S. troops deployed with the THAAD missile defense system inside Israel. A U.S. official told Axios that the U.S. does not know if a decision has been made in Iran to attack Israel. Israel launched a series of airstrikes against military targets in Iran on October 26th, killing 4 Iranian soldiers and 1 civilian was also killed. Iran has downplayed the extent of the damage to its air defense system, saying that it's already been repaired, but Iranian officials are vowing that there will be a response, and it seems like the rhetoric has kind of sharpened in recent days. Brigadier General Ali Fadavi, the deputy commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, told Al Mayadeen on Thursday that an Iranian response was inevitable, and said that Iran, quote, can target everything the Zionists possess in a single operation, end quote. So Netanyahu issued a threat against Iran on Thursday, saying the Israeli military has greater freedom of action in the country than ever before. He said, quote, the supreme goal I gave to the Israeli Defense Forces and the security branches is to prevent Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon, end quote. No sign yet that Iran has decided to build a nuclear weapon. We've seen a lot of hype kind of around that idea. There is conversations going on in Iran, members of the parliament saying, hey, we should reconsider the Ayatollah's policy of not developing nuclear weapons, considering all these threats from Israel. Again, there's no sign that they're taking those steps, but those conversations are happening. And why are they happening? They're happening because of Israel's aggression in the region. So you have Netanyahu saying, our goal is to prevent Iran from achieving a nuclear weapon. Well, you're doing everything. You're giving them every incentive to actually make one. Again, no sign yet that any decision like that has been made. Because that is something, if you see U.S. and Israel say that Iran's taken that step, that I think would mean B-2 bombers, American B-2 bombers dropping 30,000-pound bombs on their nuclear facilities. All right. So the next one here, Netanyahu says Israel must be able to enforce any Lebanon ceasefire. Another thing with the Iran-Iraq thing, there is always the chance of, Israel leaking that, kind of using it as pretext to launch more strikes against Iran, saying that they were preemptive. But at the same time, you see all the Iranian officials now saying there's going to be a response. So I'm sure that they're planning something. All right. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Thursday that Israel must be able to enforce any ceasefire deal in Lebanon amid reports of ongoing truce negotiations. Netanyahu told U.S. officials, quote, the main issue is not the paperwork of this or that agreement, but Israel's ability and determination to enforce the agreement and thwart any threat to its security from Lebanon, end quote. So his comments came a day after Israel's Khan broadcaster reported on a leaked draft for a ceasefire deal that was drawn up by the U.S., which includes provisions that are non-starters for both Hezbollah and the Lebanese government. Under the draft deal, there would be an initial 60-day ceasefire, and during that time, Israeli troops would withdraw from southern Lebanon and Hezbollah would move north of the Litani River. The Lebanese armed forces and UN peacekeepers would then be deployed to the area. They would fill the gaps there. This ceasefire plan is similar to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which was reached at the end of the 2006 war. Well, it wasn't reached. UN Security Councils are voted on. That doesn't mean that both parties agreed to them. But anyway, there's two pretty huge differences, though, in this U.S. drafted plan. One of those is that it would allow Israeli planes to operate over Lebanon in Lebanese airspace, which that's one way Israel has been violating the deal. Everybody talks about Hezbollah being south of the Litani River, but Israel has been flying surveillance over Lebanon, for years and years, violating the resolution. But anyway, so that's a big difference. Israeli planes would be able to fly over Lebanon. And then the other one is that, and I think I've mentioned this a few times now, that this is the Israeli demand, and apparently included in this U.S. drafted plan is that the Israeli military would have the right to fire in self-defense and to operate in southern Lebanon if it thought Hezbollah was violating the deal. So essentially, Israel would have freedom of military action in southern Lebanon. And that's just not, again, it's not just Hezbollah that's going to reject that. It's also Lebanon's government. People familiar with the Lebanese government's thinking told Financial Times that the draft was unacceptable to Beirut. One of the sources said, quote, Israel can't claim control over the south and airspace, end quote. So other sources told Financial Times that the leak was likely designed to damage the talks so a deal would not be reached before the U.S. presidential election. Netanyahu's comments on Thursday could have also been an attempt to sabotage negotiations like he did with the hostage deal negotiations with Hamas. He would put out these statements kind of going against what's happening behind the scenes in the negotiations, or putting out statements that are non-starters for Hamas. All right, so the next one here, Israeli strikes in East Lebanon kill 6 paramedics. This article is from Jason Ditz. Despite some media reports claiming that a ceasefire could happen in a matter of hours, which I mentioned that yesterday, that was Lebanon's prime minister who said that, Israeli airstrikes continue apace across Lebanon. As has been the case throughout their war, the targeting is in no way confined to Hezbollah militants. On Thursday, during the course of their multiple airstrikes against the city of Baalbek and surrounding areas, Israel hit a gathering point for civil defense workers, killing 4 paramedics. 2 other paramedics were killed in other attacks around the city. Deliberate attacks on paramedics and medical centers have been a constant in the air war, and a lot have also been slain in secondary attacks trying to rescue survivors from previous strikes. In the past year, 178 Lebanese paramedics have been killed and 279 wounded. 246 rescue vehicles, mainly ambulances, have been struck in those attacks. The attacks on ambulances continued today as well, again on Thursday, with one of the strikes on the coastal city of Tyre hitting and destroying an ambulance. The crew inside surprisingly survived the attack. The Lebanese Health Ministry has documented hundreds of Israeli attacks on healthcare workers, and their attacks have forced at least 8 hospitals to close, with at least 7 others operating at partial functionality amid the chaos of the offensive. All right, so the next one here, Hezbollah rocket fire kills 8 in northern Israel. This is another one from Jason Ditz. Israeli airstrikes against Lebanon continue to grow, but claims that they have massively weakened Hezbollah's capabilities have not translated to less rocket fire from Hezbollah. On Thursday, at least 8 were killed in northern Israel by Hezbollah rocket attacks. The larger incident occurred near Metula, which is right on the border next to the Lebanese village of Kfar Kela. Israeli media reported the rockets appeared to target a group of Israeli soldiers. Lebanese reports, however, were that they killed foreign workers, a farmer and 4 foreign workers in an apple orchard. The death toll has been put at 5, with an unspecified number of wounded. Other fatal strikes were reported at an olive grove in Kiryat Atta, a village near Haifa. Details are still emerging, but at least 2 were killed and wounded. So another direct hit was reported in From, where rescue teams were said to be en route, but it's not clear if there were any casualties there. So civilians were killed. It looks like the 5 who were killed it was a farmer and 4 foreign workers. But Hezbollah has kept up the rocket attacks on Israel, and that's another thing, Israel has been taking heavy casualties in the fighting on the ground in southern Lebanon, heavy for the Israeli military. I mean, compared to the casualties they're inflicting on Lebanon and, of course, Gaza, it seems small, but it's something like 36 or so Israeli soldiers have been killed fighting on the ground in South Lebanon. For Israel, that's a lot of casualties. All right, so the next one here, satellite images show that Israel razed over 1,000 buildings in South Lebanon. This article is from The Cradle. Satellite images obtained by the New York Times reveal the widespread devastation inflicted on the south of Lebanon by the invading Israeli army, including the destruction of at least 1,085 buildings since October 1st. One village, Mahabib, appears to have been virtually flattened, with only a handful of buildings still standing. In 5 other villages and towns, entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. At least 200 of the buildings destroyed by Israel were blown up in controlled demolitions, a practice the Israeli army has repeatedly used across the Gaza Strip. They were seen in 5 of the 6 towns that they looked at. Controlled demolitions, if you're able to go in and plant explosives, that means that there's no threat from the building. And this is something we've seen in Gaza extensively. These Israeli troops just blowing up these buildings. And there was an Israeli journalist, I think that this is in here, an Israeli Channel 12 reporter who was, embedded with Israeli soldiers in a TV report. He detonated a building. He blew up a building. And the irony there, of course, is all of Israel's claims about Palestinian journalists in Gaza. And here's an Israeli journalist on TV blowing up a building in Lebanon. All right, so the next one here is Zelensky lashes out at the West over North Korean troops. So Zelensky on Thursday lashed out at his Western backers over what he said was inaction over the reports of North Korean troops being sent to Russia. Zelensky said, quote, "Putin is checking the reaction of the West, and I believe that after all these reactions, Putin will decide and increase the contingent. The reaction that is there today is nothing. It is zero," end quote. So saying the West, the U.S. is not doing anything. So also on Thursday, the Biden administration claimed there are about 8,000 North Korean troops in Russia near the Ukrainian border. The U.S. expects the troops to join the fighting in Russia's Kursk Oblast, where Ukrainian forces control a small piece of territory and are being slowly pushed out by Russian troops. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. has, quote, "not yet seen these troops deploy into combat against Ukrainian forces, but we would expect that to happen in the coming days," end quote. So the U.S. is saying there's North Korean troops in Western Russia, basically near Kursk, but they haven't actually seen them join the fighting. If you remember earlier in October, the original claims was that North Korean troops were already fighting actually in Ukraine, but that turned out obviously not to be true. So Russian officials, basically what we've seen from Russia is initially, they denied that North Korean troops were fighting in Ukraine because that wasn't true. But now basically when they're asked about it, they don't confirm that there's North Korean troops, but they've just been saying, well, if there is, we got this new mutual defense treaty with them. It's totally legal. What are you going to do about it? And so Vasily Nebenzia, who's Russia's envoy to the UN, they had this big UN Security Council meeting about it, and that's basically what he said. He said, quote, "Even if everything that's being said about the cooperation between Russia and North Korea by our Western colleagues is true, why is it that the United States and allies are trying to impose on everyone the flawed logic that they have the right to help the Zelensky regime and Russian allies have no right to do a similar thing," end quote. So North Korea previously denied sending troops to Russia, but recently said that if the rumors were true, it would be a lawful deployment. North Korea's vice foreign minister said the other day, quote, "If there is such a thing that the world media is talking about, I think it will be an act conforming with the regulations of international law," end quote. So as I mentioned before, Zelensky and the hawks in the U.S., they want big escalations in response to this. And I mean, the U.S. is basically saying the North Korean troops, I've seen some comments from them that if they enter the fighting, they're going to be killed. They're going to be taken out in body bags. So I don't know, I can't really tell if the U.S., if the Biden administration is planning to do any big escalation in response. I think right now they're just trying to kind of get to the election. They're denying all of Zelensky's biggest asks, but they have been sending a whole bunch of weapons and stuff over there. Back in this past month and in September, they announced just a huge amount of military aid. So we'll see. We have seen calls from members of Congress, senior members of Congress, saying, it was Mike Turner, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, saying that if North Korean troops get involved in Ukraine, then the U.S. should consider direct military action. So, and it is, again, this is kind of setting the lines of, a potential World War III, North Korea and Russia and Iran, China, of course, and the U.S. and NATO and South Korea and Japan. I mean, man. All right, so the next one here, India and China, troop disengagement is almost complete. This article is from AP. So India and China have moved most of their frontline troops further from their disputed border in a remote region in the northern Himalayas, India's defense minister said Thursday, some 10 days after the two countries reached a new pact on military patrols that aims to end a 4-year standoff that strained relations. So this is good news if this pact works out and they really disengage, because tensions have been very high along this disputed border. Rajnath Singh, this is the Indian defense minister, he said the process of disengagement of Indian and Chinese troops near the line of actual control in Ladakh is almost complete. The line of actual control separates Chinese and Indian-held territories from Ladakh in the west to India's eastern state of Arunachal Pradesh, which China claims in its entirety. India and China fought a deadly war over the border in 1962. Ties between the two countries deteriorated in July 2020 after a military clash killed at least 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese. And the soldiers who were deployed in this area, they're not deployed with guns, so they were fighting with sticks and clubs and bats, beating each other. I think a lot of the Indians who died actually fell because it's very rocky and there's steep cliffs, up in the mountains. So that was kind of a big moment, because what happened after that is you had India kind of reluctant to join the U.S., to join this new Quad thing, which is basically what the U.S. wants to be the foundation for a anti-China NATO in Asia. But then after this, India, the nationalistic kind of fervor that came out of it from India, there was a lot of that. And then they got in on these drills with the Quad and increased military cooperation with the U.S. And the U.S. actually signed a deal to help them surveil and spy on the Chinese troops on the border. And then there were some more clashes between the Chinese and Indian troops. No deaths. But in at least one case, the U.S. actually provided India with intelligence, giving them a heads up that on Chinese troop movements when there was one of these skirmishes. So, I mean, that's a big deal. And it's like India and China are two nuclear powers, and then you have the U.S. getting involved. So it's good that the tensions are easing here. And I think India is kind of could be a big player on the U.S. side against China, but also there's a potential of it kind of just being neutral in between, like it is kind of between the U.S. and Russia. So we'll see. Hopefully, it's not clear how far back the troops were moved or whether the pact will lead to an overall reduction in the number of soldiers deployed along the border. Singh said, quote, "Our efforts will be to take the matter beyond disengagement, but for that we will have to wait a little longer," end quote. U.S. also sent troops to this region for military drills and things. Again, it's just kind of an area that's worth keeping an eye on. All right, so the last story here, the U.S. issues hundreds of sanctions on firms in a dozen countries. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The U.S. Treasury Department issued hundreds of sanctions targeting companies in a handful of countries that Washington claims are helping Russia evade sanctions. The Treasury Department said that it sanctioned 275 individuals and entities involved in supplying Russia with advanced technology. They're accusing all these companies and these people of supplying the Russian war machine, but it's essentially just trade with China. Some of the countries include India, China, Switzerland, Thailand, and Turkey. It's just we saw this. I feel like I haven't seen them say it in a while, but this was something Blinken, when he went to China, he was lecturing China. Oh, you gotta, stop fueling the war in Ukraine. They go over there, they accuse China of fueling the war in Ukraine. But China's not sending any weapons. They're just selling things to Russia that could be used to make weapons, or just trading with them in general, oil and things like that. And the U.S. is saying that they're fueling the war when the U.S. and NATO are the ones actually dumping weapons into the conflict. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Doug Bandow. American outreach to Middle Eastern despots is short-sighted. One from Daniel Larison. Biden's destructive legacy. One from Ramsey Baroud. The long history of Palestine. Why Palestinians are winning the legitimacy war. One from Sami Peretz. Israeli government's message to its soldiers. Shut up and fight. And one from Ariel Petrovich, why sanctions on Russia are literally backfiring. So please go check all of that out. Help us with our fundraiser if you can. This Saturday, I have an interview coming out, so there's going to be another episode coming out on Saturday with Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who volunteered in Gaza. He recently wrote a letter for us. He's been a longtime reader of antiwar.com. But he's the one who organized that letter, that open letter to Biden. He's the one who's kind of, he's really brought a lot of attention to the atrocities that Israel is committing in Gaza, because he saw it firsthand volunteering at that hospital, and so did all the other American healthcare workers who've done that. So we recorded it on Tuesday. It's pretty brutal stuff that we talk about, but it's definitely worth watching and listening to. I say it in the interview at one point, but I really think, when the history is written about this time period in American history, and if it's, the consensus is that Israel committed a genocide in Gaza, and who knows, what's going to happen in the future. But, this, I think the accounts from these doctors, I think, is some of the strongest evidence to say, how did people not know at the time that a genocide was being committed, when you had these American doctors going there and coming back and saying, they're shooting toddlers in the head, they're shooting toddlers in the chest. Most of the people we treat are women and children. There's no evidence of Hamas militants in these hospitals. So these are just some of the things that we talked about. So definitely check that out. It's going to come out Saturday at noon on YouTube, and you could also listen to the podcast version or watch on Rumble if you prefer over there. Also, I put everything on Twitter or X. I don't actually believe anyone who watches on Twitter makes it to the end. So if you're watching on Twitter and you made it to the end, let me know. Comment. Anyway, that's it. Again, help us with our fundraiser if you can. You'll see the episode on Saturday, and then I'll be back after the weekend with some more news. I hope everyone had a fun Halloween if you celebrated. Happy All Saints Day, which is Friday. I'll see you in a few days. Thanks for listening.